Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders held a hearing on Thursday about a bill he introduced to reduce the United States work week to 4 days, 32 hours, without any loss in pay. The 32-Hour Work Week Act would reduce the standard work week in the United States from 40 hours to 32 hours over the course of 4 years. It would also require overtime pay at a time and a half for workdays longer than 8 hours, and overtime pay that would pay workers double if their workday is longer than 12 hours, NBC News reports.
Here is Senator Sanders himself talking about the bill on MSNBC.
The 40-hour week, as I recall, was established in 1940. All right, that is 84 years ago. There have been a few modest changes in the economy over the last 84 years. And what's gone on is workers today are far more productive. I mean, think about all of the technology and equipment that's out there today. So the question that we're going to be asking tomorrow is who benefits from all of the changes that have taken place in the economy. With all of this new technology and increase in worker productivity, workers should benefit from these changes, not just large corporations and the stockholders.
I have a couple of thoughts about this, and I just think fundamentally it doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense. And I'd like to start with the fact that this is essentially a 25% marginal pay raise with actually a reduction when you factor in the reduction in hours. The only place that really leads is a rise in prices, which of course is basically a tax on lower income working class individuals, that they have to pay more for the goods that they're receiving. And the second thing that could happen if you don't raise prices is you either cut hours even further and prevent people from having full-time employee status and you put them on as part-time employees, or, as Bernie Sanders kind of alluded to there, you get replaced by AI and machines.
Yeah, there are a lot of things I disagree with Bernie Sanders on. This is one that goes on that extremely long list. At this point, when we see the outgrowth of AI, when we see transitional employment changing significantly, colleges are having a hard time preparing people for the jobs of the future and the jobs of now. We have more and more individuals across this country who are working gig economy jobs. So majority of those individuals are working well over 40 hours and don't even have benefits associated with it. I think that there needed to be a more intrinsic thought process as to what the nature of work looks like today. But also, to your point, there is no way that you will have a 32-hour work week and still be able to sustain things like paid leave, things like healthcare. They're not going to do that. So I think that this is a pie in the sky narrative that Bernie Sanders has come up with as he does several things. It's not going to work. It's not feasible. And in an economy where people are kind of stretched thin and trying to find other means of making more money, just because you have a 40-hour week or even over a 40-hour week doesn't necessarily mean that you can still pay your bills. We're seeing instances where people are taking on multiple jobs, and people who aren't even in the gig economy, individuals who have regular 401k earning jobs are still taking on these other roles to help them be able to sustain for now, not even the future. I think that this is behest of any real understanding of how our economy works, but also structurally problematic, because what it would end up doing is pushing a lot more, AI intervention a whole lot sooner. Automation has already killed several jobs. But in addition to that, I think that it puts the American worker in a very bad position.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the case that more people will either work without benefits or work under the table entirely. I know that's something that usually happens when you either increase the minimum wage beyond what the economy can handle or change other factors in terms of what benefits companies have to offer. And that's not to say that workers should not get access to good benefit packages or that they don't deserve a good wage. But you also have to balance that with the economic concerns of how that actually affects the labor market writ large. And in this case, you hear commonly from people who advocate for the 4-day work week that workers are more productive when they only work 4 days a week. But the reality is that they're still not completing as much work as they would if they were working 5 days. Otherwise, every corporation on planet Earth would have moved to the 4-day work week. It's just basic logic. I mean, corporations, for the most part, when it comes to economics, are rational actors. And so if they haven't done it yet, there's probably a good reason for it. And I would also say that this would have a hugely devastating effect on small businesses, right? a large corporation like Walmart or Amazon might be able to shoulder this burden, but a small business is really going to struggle, and potentially you would see probably thousands of them shutter if they had to move to a 4-day work week. I mean, we saw this happen during the pandemic, right, where there were a lot of lockdown restrictions that were put on businesses that were marginally more difficult for small businesses to hang on to. A lot of these small businesses, for example, didn't have e-commerce set up. They didn't have the ability to have these large shipping. They couldn't contract with these large shipping companies to be able to make sure their products were still getting to people. And you saw Amazon and other companies like that enrich themselves even further during that process because, again, it's only anti-competitive when you put these kind of regulations on small businesses, while the large businesses can really absorb that new cost.
No, you're right. And I feel like small businesses they're the driver of the American economy. When we talk about small businesses, the overwhelming majority of people working today work in some level of small business, or they own one themselves. Yeah. This would be greatly detrimental to them. The other side of that, this isn't going to go anywhere, first and foremost, clearing that for everybody. This isn't going anywhere in the Senate. The other thing here is that I think that to a certain extent what we've seen post-pandemic is this outgrowth of individuals, and I would argue on both the left and the right, who are trying to mitigate the issue of parents having to be far away from their kids. I think that one of the things that resettled for all of us post-pandemic and during it was the need to be more family-oriented. Your family was right there. Acknowledging that we have more women in the workforce today than we've ever had historically, and what that means in terms of the family and the family structure. Having an extra day to be with your kid could be something that is appealing, specifically for folks who have younger kids. But I would argue that, many of those are also small business owners. A majority of women who are working today are women who are either working at small businesses or own their own small businesses. So the caveat to that would be some of the things you mentioned earlier. The cost would be too high for them to do it as an employer. But also I think that there would be some functional issues around, healthcare access and other things. We saw what happened with a large corporation, Walmart, when the Obamacare rollout started, and they, instead of opting in to pay their workers and ensure that they had health insurance, they delineated the hours. They dropped down the hours of many people just to where they were right at that part-time, so they would not have to pay their health insurance. I think that this has a significant amount of burden not only on the employer but also on the employee.
Yeah, and I would say that even from a more 10,000-foot view perspective, this kind of misses the larger conversation that I think we should be having about our economic system, and especially when it comes to the working class, is that you used to be able to support a family on one income. And this goes directly to your point about childcare, right? A lot of moms decided during the pandemic that they either wanted to work from home or wanted to take on a hybrid role or even just leave the workforce because they wanted to be able to spend more time with their children. They didn't want to have to hand off their child to a daycare worker anymore, or even just make enough money to pay for daycare, right? And just barely break even. And so I always think about this book from Elizabeth Warren back in the 90s called The Two Income Trap, which talked about this sort of keeping up with the Joneses system, where we got to this point in our economy where more and more families have to rely on a two-income earner household in order to stay afloat and pay for all of the things that their children need in our economy. And it seems like things like this are trying to address something related to workers' rights, but they're missing that larger issue of the fact that our economic system should be oriented towards making sure that people can raise functional, healthy families.
No, absolutely. Functional, healthy families, more quality, affordable childcare. I don't think that women in particular should have to make the decision between working or staying at home. If you want to stay at home, our economy should function in a way that allows for women to do that, especially in the earliest stages of their child's life. But in addition to that, now even that two-income household can be somewhat elusive, because even two incomes, depending on what city you live in America, cannot be enough. So I think that there's a lot to handle here, and I see his thought frame and where it's going. I just think that this is wrong-sided policy.
The wrong answer.
It's
I agree.
Not going to make any real quake.
I saw a study recently actually that said in D.C. apparently you have to make $275,000 for a two-income household to be considered like middle class, which I think is a little high just from my own personal experience, but it's true. When you're living in a big city, things are very, very expensive. All right, we're going to be back. More Rising after this.